The humidity in the Philippine jungle was suffocating, turning every breath into an effort and every movement into a battle against the oppressive heat. It was March 1945, and I was Corporal Daniel Reeves, a mechanic attached to the 37th Infantry Division, pushing through Luzon toward Manila. The jungle pressed in from all sides, thick vegetation, twisted vines, and trees so dense that sunlight barely penetrated to the forest floor. We'd been fighting for weeks, pushing the Japanese backyard by bloody yard through terrain that favored defenders and made every advance a nightmare. My rifle had been destroyed 2 days earlier when a mortar round landed close enough to throw me 10 feet through the air. The weapon took shrapnel that bent the barrel and cracked the stock beyond repair. In the chaos of constant combat, with supply lines stretched thin and ammunition always scarce, getting a replacement wasn't as simple as asking. The armory sergeant had looked at me with exhausted eyes and said, "Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. We've got 300 men needing weapons, Reeves. You're a mechanic. Figure something out." So I did what mechanics do. I improvised. The wreckage of a P-40 Warhawk lay scattered across a small clearing about half a mile from our position. Japanese fighters had shot it down weeks earlier, and the pilot hadn't made it. What remained was a twisted skeleton of aluminum, steel, and various mechanical components that had once been a fighting aircraft. Most soldiers saw junk. I saw possibilities. I spent every spare moment over the next 3 days scavenging parts from that wreck. The barrel came from the aircraft's hydraulic system, a high-grade steel tube meant to handle extreme pressure, straight and true. I modified it carefully, using files and makeshift tools to create rifling inside, borrowing a damaged rifle barrel's grooves as my template. The firing mechanism came from the plane's machine gun mounting, adapted and reinforced to handle the impact of a firing pin I fashioned from a landing gear strut bolt. The stock was the hardest part. I carved it from a piece of the aircraft's wooden interior paneling, shaping it hour by hour with a knife and rough sandpaper made from gluing sand to fabric. It wasn't pretty. The wood was scarred and the shape was awkward, but it was functional. I used parts from the pilot's seat mechanism to create a crude but effective bolt action, testing and adjusting until the movement was smooth enough to cycle rounds reliably. The first time I showed it to my squad, they laughed. "What the hell is that supposed to be?" Private Martinez asked, barely containing his amusement. "Looks like something a kid would build in his garage." Sergeant Cooper took the weapon from my hands, examining it with a skeptical eye. His face said everything before his mouth did. "Reeves, this is a piece of shit. You seriously expect this thing to fire without blowing up in your face?" "It'll work," I said, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. "I've tested the pressure tolerances. The barrel can handle it. The mechanism is sound." "Sound?" Lieutenant Morrison had joined us, attracted by the laughter. He looked at my creation with the kind of expression usually reserved for finding something dead and rotting. "Corporal, this is an abomination. I can't allow you to carry this into combat. It's dangerous, to you and to everyone around you. With respect, sir, I don't have another option. Supply can't get me a rifle, and we're moving out tomorrow." "I'm not going into the jungle unarmed." Morrison studied me for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine, but the first time that thing malfunctions, you ditch it and pick up a weapon from a casualty. Understood?" "Understood, sir." The whispers and jokes followed me for the rest of that day. "Aircraft gun," they called it, always with a smirk. Some of the men took bets on how quickly it would jam or explode. Private Jackson, a farm kid from Kansas, actually took the time to write down odds. 50-50 it would fail on the first shot. 70-30 it wouldn't last through a single engagement. I ignored them and kept working on my creation, making small adjustments, ensuring every component was as solid as I could make it with the limited tools available. That night I test-fired it in a remote area with Sergeant Cooper watching from behind a tree, ready to call for a medic if the weapon exploded in my hands. It didn't explode. The recoil was heavy. The stock design wasn't optimal for distributing the force, but the round went exactly where I aimed it, punching through a tree trunk 40 yards away with satisfying accuracy. "I'll be damned," Cooper muttered. "The piece of junk actually works." "Told you," I said, working the bolt to eject the spent casing. The mechanism was rough but functional, requiring more force than a standard rifle but operating reliably enough. The next morning, we moved out before dawn, pushing deeper into Japanese-held territory. Intelligence said there was a supply depot about 3 miles ahead, poorly defended and ripe for capture. Intelligence, as usual, was wrong. We walked into an ambush an hour after sunrise. The Japanese had positioned themselves perfectly, using the jungle terrain to create interlocking fields of fire that covered the narrow trail we were following. The first burst of machine gun fire cut down our point man before anyone could react. Then all hell broke loose. Rifles, grenades, mortars, everything hitting us from 3 sides at once. I dove behind a fallen log as bullets chewed through the vegetation around me. Martinez landed beside me, his face pale with shock. "They're everywhere. We need to fall back." "Can't fall back," Cooper shouted from somewhere to my left. "They've got us boxed in." I risked a look over the log and immediately identified the biggest threat. A Japanese machine gun position about 60 yards ahead, elevated on a small rise and pouring fire down on our exposed position. The gunner was protected by sandbags and had excellent visibility of our entire line. As long as that gun was operational, we were pinned down and dying. I raised my improvised rifle, settling the crude stock against my shoulder. The sights were basic, just 2 pieces of metal I'd attached to the barrel, but they were aligned properly. I'd made sure of that during my test firing. Through them, I could see the machine gunner's helmet, visible for brief moments as he shifted to track different targets. I took a breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil slammed into my shoulder hard enough to bruise, but I barely noticed. 60 yards away, the machine gunner jerked backward, his helmet flying off as my round found its mark. The gun went silent. "Holy shit," Martinez breathed beside me. "You got him." But there was no time to celebrate. Another Japanese soldier immediately took over the machine gun, and I was already working the bolt, ejecting the spent casing and chambering a fresh round. The movement was stiff, requiring more effort than I would have liked, but it worked. I acquired the new target, adjusted for the slight difference in position, and fired again. Another hit. The machine gun went silent again, this time for good. Around me, I could hear the sounds of intense combat, rifles cracking, grenades exploding, men shouting orders and warnings. But I was in what soldiers call the zone, that strange state where time seems to slow and every movement becomes automatic. I worked the bolt, identified targets, fired, worked the bolt, acquired, fired. The rhythm became mechanical, each shot carefully aimed, each target selected based on threat level and opportunity. A Japanese officer appeared in a gap between trees, rallying his men for a counterattack. I put a round through his chest before he could give the order. 2 soldiers tried to flank our position from the right, using the thick jungle as cover. I caught them in a brief moment of exposure and dropped both with consecutive shots, the bolt action cycling smoothly despite its rough construction. The aircraft gun, as my squad had mockingly called it, was performing flawlessly. I lost track of time during that first engagement. Minutes blurred together in a continuous cycle of identifying targets, firing, cycling the bolt, firing again. The weapon grew hot in my hands, the barrel radiating heat that I could feel even through my gloves. But it kept working, kept sending rounds exactly where I aimed them. When the firing finally died down and the surviving Japanese soldiers retreated into the jungle, I had gone through nearly 40 rounds. My shoulder was one massive bruise from the heavy recoil. My hands ached from working the stiff bolt mechanism, but I was alive, and more importantly, my squad was alive. "Reeves!" Cooper appeared beside me, his eyes wide. "I counted at least 8 confirmed kills from your position. 8, with that Franken gun you built from airplane parts." I lowered the rifle, suddenly aware of how badly my hands were shaking. Adrenaline crash, a familiar feeling after intense combat. "It worked," I said simply. "Told you it would work." Lieutenant Morrison found me a few minutes later, as I was reloading with ammunition scrounged from casualties. He stared at my improvised weapon with an expression completely different from the mockery of yesterday. "Corporal, I owe you an apology. That weapon just saved lives, multiple lives." He paused, seeming to struggle with what to say next. "I've never seen shooting like that. Under fire, with a weapon you built yourself from scrap metal and hope. That was exceptional. Just doing my job, sir. That was well beyond your job." He glanced back toward the ambush site, where medics were working on the wounded. "We lost 3 men in that ambush. Would have been a lot more if you hadn't taken out that machine gun position so quickly. And the follow-up shots. Jesus, Reeves, you were dropping them like targets at a shooting range." The reality of what I'd done was starting to sink in. 8 men dead by my hand in less than 15 minutes. 8 Japanese soldiers who'd woken up this morning probably thinking about home, about family, about survival. Now they were corpses in the jungle, killed by a weapon cobbled together from aircraft parts. I pushed the thought away. This was war. They'd been trying to kill my friends, my brothers in arms. If I hadn't shot them, they would have killed us. That was the reality, simple and brutal, but 8 men in one engagement. Word spread quickly through the company. By the time we made camp that evening, soldiers from other platoons were coming by to see the aircraft gun and the mechanic who'd built it. The mockery was gone, replaced by genuine curiosity and respect. Private Jackson, the farm kid who'd written down betting odds on my weapon's failure, approached me at dinner. "Reeves, I owe you an apology, and about $50 to the guys who bet on your gun working. Never seen anything like what you did today." "It's just a rifle," I said, uncomfortable with the attention. "Fires bullets like any other rifle." "Yeah, but you built it yourself, from plain parts, and then used it to save our asses." He shook his head in wonder. "That's not just a rifle, man. That's like something out of a pulp adventure story." I tried to deflect, to minimize what had happened, but the attention kept coming. Sergeant Cooper told the story to anyone who'd listen, embellishing slightly with each retelling. By his account, I'd single-handedly held off the entire Japanese ambush, dropping enemies left and right while bullets rained around me like some kind of action movie hero. The reality had been far less glamorous. Lots of fear, some luck, and a weapon that happened to work when I desperately needed it to. But soldiers love a good story, and I'd given them one. That night I cleaned and maintained my improvised rifle by firelight, checking each component for wear or damage. The barrel was holding up well, showing minimal wear despite the heavy use. The bolt mechanism needed some oil. I used gun oil from a damaged rifle to lubricate the moving parts. The stock had developed a crack near the trigger guard, so I wrapped it tightly with cord to reinforce the weak point. Martinez sat down beside me, watching the maintenance work with interest. "You really built that whole thing yourself? From scratch?" "From aircraft parts," I corrected. "Not quite from scratch. The hard work was already done. I just had to adapt the components for a different purpose." "Still impressive, man. I couldn't build a working rifle if you gave me a fully equipped machine shop and a month to do it." He paused, then asked quietly, "How many did you get today, really?" 8 confirmed, I said, not looking up from my work. "Maybe more. Hard to tell in the chaos. And you're okay with that?" I thought about his question carefully. Was I okay with killing 8 men in less than an hour? No, not okay exactly, but it had been necessary. They were trying to kill us, and I'd stopped them. In the moral calculus of war, that had to count for something. "I'm alive," I finally said. "My friends are alive. That's all that matters right now." The next day brought more combat. The Japanese were retreating but fighting viciously for every yard of ground, turning the jungle into a continuous battlefield. We advanced through an area of dense vegetation, visibility reduced to yards, every shadow potentially concealing an enemy soldier. I was positioned near the front of our column when we encountered a Japanese patrol, maybe 10 soldiers, moving perpendicular to our line of advance. They spotted us at the same instant we spotted them, and both groups dove for cover as the shooting started. I found myself behind a massive tree trunk, my aircraft gun already in my hands and ready to fire. The Japanese soldiers were using the thick jungle vegetation as cover, making them difficult targets, but they had to move to effectively engage us, and movement meant exposure. I waited, watching for opportunities. A helmet appeared briefly behind a bush. I fired and the helmet disappeared with a spray of red. 2 soldiers tried to advance on our flank, crawling through the undergrowth. I caught a glimpse of movement and fired twice in quick succession, working the bolt with practiced efficiency. Both soldiers stopped moving. The engagement lasted maybe 5 minutes, but felt like hours. Every second was a calculation. Identify target, assess threat, aim, fire, cycle the bolt, acquire next target. The rifle's limitations became more apparent in sustained combat. The heavy recoil made rapid follow-up shots difficult. The stiff bolt action slowed my rate of fire compared to a standard rifle, but the weapon remained reliable, firing every time I pulled the trigger, sending rounds where I aimed them. When the firing stopped, 4 more Japanese soldiers lay dead, victims of my improvised weapon. The rest had retreated deeper into the jungle, leaving behind their casualties and some equipment. Lieutenant Morrison approached my position, his face grim. "Reeves, you just accounted for 4 more confirmed kills. That brings your 2-day total to 12. 12 men. The number seemed unreal, too large to process. I'd killed 12 human beings in 2 days with a weapon I'd built from aircraft parts, while my squad mates mocked me. I'm putting you in for a commendation," Morrison continued. "What you're doing with that improvised weapon is remarkable. The accuracy, the kill rate, It's exceptional marksmanship under combat conditions. Sir, I'm just doing your job, I know. But some soldiers do their job adequately. You're doing yours exceptionally. He paused, studying my face. How's the weapon holding up? Still functional. I'll need to do some maintenance tonight, but it's performing better than I expected. That was an understatement. Despite my careful construction, I'd expected the aircraft gun to show serious wear after sustained combat use. But the components I'd chosen were proving more durable than anticipated. The aircraft-grade steel barrel was handling the heat and pressure of repeated firing without significant degradation. The bolt mechanism, while rough, was operating reliably. Even the improvised stock was holding together despite the heavy recoil stress. That afternoon brought the heaviest fighting yet. We encountered a fortified Japanese position protecting a critical road junction, bunkers, trenches, machine gun nests, the works. The position had to be taken, but frontal assault would be suicide. Instead, Lieutenant Morrison organized a flanking maneuver, sending 2 squads around the left side while the rest of the company provided suppressing fire from the front. I was part of the flanking element, moving carefully through the jungle with Sergeant Cooper's squad. We approached the Japanese position from the side, finding a spot with clear visibility of their defensive line about 80 yards out. Long range for combat shooting, especially with an improvised weapon, but I'd test-fired the aircraft gun at various distances during my initial trials. I knew its capabilities and limitations at extended range. The bullet drop was more pronounced than a standard rifle due to the barrel characteristics, but it was predictable and consistent. "Reeves, you think you can hit anything from here?" Cooper whispered beside me. "I can try," I said, settling into a stable shooting position behind a fallen log. The range was challenging, but I had a clear view of the Japanese defensive position. Soldiers moved between positions. Officers consulted over maps, machine gunners manned their weapons, all potential targets. I selected the most immediate threat, a machine gunner with excellent coverage of the main approach route. At 80 yards, I had to account for significant bullet drop. I aimed high, accounting for the distance and the weapon's characteristics, and squeezed the trigger. The round hit low and left, kicking up dirt near the machine gun position but missing the gunner. But now I had my 0 for this range. I adjusted, aimed again and fired. This time the machine gunner collapsed, my round finding its mark, despite the extreme distance for combat shooting with an improvised weapon. Around me, my squad members stared in disbelief. "He hit him," Martinez muttered. "At 80 yards with a homemade rifle, he actually hit him." I was already cycling the bolt and acquiring the next target, an officer rallying troops near a bunker entrance. The same elevation adjustment, slightly right for wind. I fired and the officer went down. The Japanese position erupted in confusion. They knew they were taking fire but couldn't immediately identify the source. I used their confusion to devastating effect, firing methodically at high-value targets. Another machine gunner, a soldier manning a mortar, 2 riflemen moving to reinforce a weak point in their line. By the time they figured out where the shots were coming from and began returning fire, I'd killed 6 more Japanese soldiers and created enough chaos to allow our main assault to succeed with minimal casualties. The position fell within 20 minutes. The Japanese defenders either killed or retreating in disorder, and I had added 6 more names to a list I never wanted to keep, but couldn't stop counting. 18 confirmed kills in 2 days, with a rifle I'd built from airplane parts. That evening, as we consolidated our position and prepared for the inevitable counterattack, word of my kill count spread throughout the entire company. Soldiers I'd never met came by to see the aircraft gun and the mechanic who wielded it with such deadly efficiency. Captain Hayes, our company commander, personally sought me out. He was a hard man, a veteran of campaigns from Guadalcanal to New Guinea, not given to unnecessary praise or sentiment. "Corporal Reeves," he said, examining my improvised weapon with professional interest, "I've been hearing remarkable things about you and this creation of yours. 18 confirmed kills in 2 days. Is that accurate?" "Yes, sir, 18 confirmed. With a weapon you built yourself when supply couldn't provide you with a standard rifle?" "Yes, sir." He was quiet for a moment, turning the aircraft gun over in his hands, studying the improvised components and crude construction. "In 20 years of military service, I've never seen anything like this. The ingenuity required to build a functional weapon from aircraft parts is impressive enough. But to then use that weapon with such deadly effectiveness in combat, that's exceptional, soldier." "Thank you, sir. I'm recommending you for the Silver Star. What you've accomplished in the past 2 days has directly contributed to our success in taking this sector. The machine gun positions you eliminated, the officers you killed, the chaos you created in enemy ranks, all of it gave our forces the advantage we needed to advance with minimal casualties. He handed the rifle back to me carefully. This weapon belongs in a museum someday, Reeves. It's a testament to American ingenuity and determination. I wanted to tell him it was just a rifle, that I'd simply done what any soldier would do when given the necessary skills and circumstances. But the words stuck in my throat, because it wasn't just a rifle. It was proof that sometimes, when everything goes wrong and you're left with nothing but scraps and desperation, human creativity and determination can forge something extraordinary from the wreckage. The Japanese counterattack came before dawn, a desperate attempt to retake the road junction. They hit us with everything they had: infantry, mortars, even a light tank that had somehow made it through the jungle trails. The fighting was intense and chaotic, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness, tracer rounds streaking through the air like deadly fireworks. I found a position in a partially collapsed bunker, the improvised rifle already growing hot in my hands as I engaged target after target. The Japanese came in waves, pressing the attack despite heavy casualties. They knew the strategic importance of this position and were willing to die to reclaim it. I gave them what they wanted. An officer led a squad in a flanking maneuver, trying to get around our defensive line. I caught them in a brief moment of exposure and fired 3 times, dropping 3 soldiers in quick succession. The officer dove for cover, but I'd already adjusted for his movement. My 4th shot found him as he tried to rally his remaining men. A machine gun team set up position in a shell crater, preparing to pour fire into our ranks. I hit the gunner with my first shot at that target, then worked the bolt and shot the loader before he could take over the weapon. 2 more soldiers tried to crew the abandoned machine gun. I killed both of them, the aircraft gun cycling reliably despite the sustained fire. The tank became my focus when it emerged from the jungle, its machine guns spraying our position with suppressing fire. I couldn't penetrate its armor, but I could target the commander standing in the turret hatch, trying to direct the vehicle through the chaos. One carefully aimed shot removed that threat. When another crew member tried to take over the commander's position, I killed him too. The tank, effectively blinded without a commander to guide it, became a stationary target for our bazooka team. The battle lasted 2 hours, an eternity of continuous combat that left my ears ringing and my hands cramping from working the bolt mechanism hundreds of times. When the Japanese finally broke off the attack and retreated into the jungle, I'd fired every round I had and scrounged more from casualties twice. As the sun rose over the battlefield, revealing the carnage of the night's fighting, Sergeant Cooper found me still in my bunker position, the aircraft gun resting across my knees. Reeves, I counted your confirmed kills from this position alone. Another 7 minimum, probably more that we can't verify because they fell back into the jungle. His voice held something like awe. That brings your 2-day total to at least 20. 20 men dead. 20 human beings killed by a weapon everyone had mocked as a piece of junk built by a desperate mechanic. The number was staggering, impossible to fully process. The gun's done, I said quietly, finally allowing myself to acknowledge the weapon's condition. The barrel was heavily fouled, the bolt mechanism was grinding badly, and the reinforced stock had developed multiple cracks. I pushed it too hard. It won't fire reliably anymore. Doesn't matter, Cooper said. Supply finally got a shipment in this morning. You can have your pick of any rifle in the armory. I looked down at the aircraft gun one last time, the crude stock I'd carved from wooden paneling, the hydraulic tube I'd modified into a rifle barrel, the bolt mechanism adapted from machine gun parts. It was ugly, uncomfortable to shoot, and required constant maintenance, but for 2 days in the Philippine jungle, it had been exactly what I needed when I needed it. 20 confirmed? I asked Cooper, still struggling to accept the number. 20 minimum. You basically decimated an entire Japanese company in 2 days, Reeves, with a gun made from airplane parts. Later that day, after I'd been issued a standard M1 Garand, Captain Hayes approached with a war correspondent who'd been embedded with our unit. Corporal Reeves, the correspondent said, his camera already out. I'd like to write a story about you and your improvised weapon. A mechanic who builds a rifle from aircraft parts and then uses it to kill 20 enemy soldiers. That's an inspiring story. So I told the story about the P-40 wreckage, about the days spent scavenging and adapting parts, about the mockery from my squad when I first showed them the finished weapon, and about the 2 days of combat when that improvised rifle had proven its worth beyond anyone's expectations. The correspondent took pictures of me holding the aircraft gun, now damaged beyond further use, but preserved as evidence of what I'd accomplished. He interviewed other soldiers who'd witnessed my shooting, recording their accounts of impossible-seeming shots at extreme range under combat conditions. They mocked his gun built from aircraft parts, the correspondent said as he scribbled notes, until he killed 20 Japanese soldiers in 2 days. That's my headline, 20 soldiers. That was the official count, the number that would be recorded in after-action reports and medal citations. The real number was probably higher, but verification was difficult in jungle combat, where bodies fell in thick vegetation or were dragged away by retreating forces. 20 men whose deaths I had caused with a weapon I'd built from desperation and aircraft wreckage. The article ran in stars and stripes a week later, then was picked up by newspapers back home. Mechanic builds rifle from aircraft wreckage, kills 20 enemy soldiers, the headlines proclaimed. The story spread, growing and embellishing with each retelling. The Silver Star was pinned on my chest by General MacArthur himself during a ceremony in Manila after the city's liberation. He shook my hand, said something about American ingenuity and determination, posed for photographs. The aircraft gun was there too, displayed on a table like a museum piece, its crude construction at odds with the formal military ceremony surrounding it. "You turned wreckage into a weapon," MacArthur said, examining the improvised rifle with professional interest, "and then used that weapon to achieve remarkable results in combat. That's the spirit that will win this war, soldier." The war in the Philippines continued for months after that, pushing the Japanese back island by island. I fought through it with my issued M1 Garand, a reliable weapon that never failed me. But it never felt quite right in my hands, never had the familiar weight and balance of the aircraft gun I'd built myself. Years after the war, long after I'd returned home and tried to build a normal life, people would still ask about those 2 days, about the rifle I'd built from airplane parts, about the 20 men I'd killed. I'd tell them the truth, that I'd been scared, that I'd done what I had to do, that the weapon worked far better than anyone expected. I'd tell them about the mockery that turned to respect, about the impossible shots that somehow found their marks, about the weight of taking lives even in justified combat. The aircraft gun itself ended up in a military museum, displayed behind glass with a placard explaining its history. Visitors would read the story, marvel at the crude construction, wonder how such a weapon could have been so effective. What they couldn't see was the desperate hope that went into building it, the determination that kept me working when everyone said it wouldn't work, the fear and adrenaline that made impossible shots somehow possible, the weight of lives taken and lives saved, all balanced on a rifle that shouldn't have existed, but did. They mocked his gun built from aircraft parts, the headline had said, until he killed 20 Japanese soldiers in 2 days. The mockery had been real. The kills had been real. But between those two facts lay a more complex story about human ingenuity, about survival, about the choices we make when every option is bad and we have to pick the least terrible one. I built a rifle because I needed a weapon. I used it effectively because the alternative was death. And I lived with the consequences because that's what soldiers do. We carry the weight of what war demands of us, bearing witness to our own actions and their costs. 20 men, 2 days, one improvised rifle that defied every expectation,